Here, as we finish up chapter 15, Jesus is finishing up his time on the cross. The Bible says that this is the 6th hour of the day, which would have been noonday. From the 6th hour to the 9th hour of the day, the sun went dark. And it accompanied this time of isolation that Jesus was experiencing there on the cross. When he says, "Father, why have you forsaken me?" It was in that moment that God's wrath was pouring out towards sin onto Jesus, taking the punishment that we deserve. And for that very brief moment, Jesus would experience a break in relationship with his Father. This, by the way, is the worst thing about hell. Hell is a real place, and it's described in a very real as eternal torment. But there is complete isolation there. It's not a party. There are no friends. And the worst thing is that God's presence is never to be enjoyed again. So here on the cross, while Jesus is hanging there, we see another confirmation, a declaration of who Jesus is by a pagan. First, we see the sign above his head that declares him as King of the Jews. But we also see this Roman soldier here declaring him to be the Son of God. Upon his death, so many things happen that are described when you put all the information from the parallel accounts together. There's so many things to talk about that I won't be able to cover today, but we're going to run through a few very quickly. The sun was dark. All right. The veil of the temple was described as being torn from the top to the bottom, indicating not only that it was from God above, he did it, but that man would no longer be separated from him. As the cloth veil was torn, it only followed Jesus' veil of the flesh that had already been torn. He who was the perfect sacrifice was also our perfect high priest, who gives us continual and perfect access to the Father. This was an incredible moment in history that was signified by earthquakes and even tombs being emptied with their previous tenants walking around for all to witness. Perhaps another indication that though Jesus died, he would make the formerly dead alive. That's you and I. And make no mistake, Jesus was dead. This is a significant part of the gospel because his burial in that tomb verified his sacrifice and would later make the resurrection all the more fantastic. But let me leave you with one final thought. It's very important to see that Jesus was buried before the Sabbath started that evening. And when he said that it is finished, he meant that the work needed to secure the salvation for all those who would believe was done. Nothing more was needed to add for our salvation. But it also meant that the work on earth was done. His suffering was over. The punishment for sin had been endured, and that it was time for him to rest. When they laid him in that tomb, Jesus literally and figuratively rested. Very appropriate because it was on the Sabbath. Just as God rested on that 7th day after those 6 days of creation, we see here again God resting on the Sabbath. We worship through a beautiful song this Easter Sunday about this very thing. Think about the significance of Jesus resting from his redemptive work on the Sabbath, on the day of rest. And Jesus invites you into that same rest. He says, "Come to me, all who are weary, and I will give you rest. Rest from your sin. Rest from your shame and your guilt. Rest from trying to do it yourself." He will take that work that he did and apply it to your life and give you complete rest, and he will cleanse you from all unrighteousness. This is the truth that you need to think about and own today. Jesus gives you that invitation to come into his rest, and that is the rest of the gospel.